have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by Grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. We have had some incredible guests. So we got another one today talking about the Ian Freeman story. So give us a little background.
Well, we're going to bring in a guest here in just a moment. And I've known them for a very long time, Ian and Mark. I knew Ian when he was 19 years old. He knew he wanted to be in radio all along. And I was press secretary for the Harry Brown campaign. And he booked Harry Brown to be on his show, which was a gutsy move. He had bought radio time down in Florida. It's an incredible thing. And I watched their career blossom and grow. And we're going to talk with Mark Edge about that.
Well, welcome, Mark. Glad you're with us on Gracearchy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to be here. Bill, I don't know you very terribly well, but I must say Jim Babka is one of my favorite human beings on the planet. I do not know a more righteous and gentle and kind man. So thank you very much for having me on, Jim.
Well, wow. I feel like I'm the one that got an introduction here.
Seriously, well, we've been calling him the voice of happiness, harmony, and prosperity, but I think your intro actually works better.
That's Bill's choice, not mine. So
it's difficult to label yourself as righteous, right? Like it's a difficult thing to really sort of be able to work. In fact, cult leader might be the thing that comes up
exactly.
to people who call it to themselves.
Yep.
However, I have known Jim Babka since 2002, and I'm confident in what I say.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that so much. We're going to spend most of this broadcast talking about Ian Freeman, who is in prison for unjust reasons. And we're going to want to talk about freeiannow.org and his cause. That's where most of this conversation is going to go. But I'd like to get a little background on you and the background about, I would like to expand for the audience how we know each other, because it's actually, I think, an important part of the story that we're going to tell about Ian. So I appreciate you being here. Let's start off with, how did you and Ian hook up in radio? Because that's, Ian's there at 19, starting, already doing some radio. How do the two of you connect?
Right. So in 1999, I went to work at Clear Channel of Sarasota. At the time, it was called Radio First. And Ian Freeman was there. He was a disc jockey, probably the third or fourth man down on the totem pole of a little rock and roll station at 105.9 WYNF was the call letters. And he did, evenings, some afternoons when somebody would call in. He was, unimportant, but we talked. And I would go into the studio. He'd be the only guy in there. He only had to do something every 20 minutes or so. And we'd go in there and chat and talk about different things. And of course, I agreed with him on some of his libertarian principles, and I disagreed on some principles too. And we talk about a lot of those things. We talked about ideas a lot, and how to grow our separate businesses as much as we could. And I grew to like him very much. One day in 2002, I had recently broken up with my fiance, and Ian asked me if I would like to man the phones the first night of his new radio program that he had managed to get there. Now, you have to consider this is 4,500 watts on the FM dial. Sometimes you couldn't hear it clearly at the studio. It was, really not a very big station.
I had a similar line about my radio show where I was on 4 stations national, and one of them was in the back of a department store. Yeah. That came out later too, fundamentally, but basically we were friends at a radio station. He asked me if I would man the phones, and then he was,
he was talking on the air the first night, and I realized within the first 5 minutes he was mistaken about something, and I needed to correct him. So I pulled a microphone just like this. I yanked it on over, and I said, "Oh, I'd like to correct you." And essentially, I made a living out of arguing with Ian about minutia on the radio for 20 years.
Minutia, yeah, because you guys spiritually were brothers, right? You guys had you developed a real common bond.
Yep. Ian is, brother is the best term to describe Ian. We were brothers. I mean, we weren't friends in so much as we would choose to spend time together all the time. He was an introvert. When he wasn't at work, he was going to be at home playing with his gadgets. And whereas, I was out and about selling radio ads and these kind of things. But I couldn't have asked for a more honest and trustworthy business partner over the course of 20 years. Now, he and I aren't really working together at this time, but I spend as much time as I can trying to get him out of jail.
Well, before we get to that, so you guys go national. You start a show called Free Talk Live together. When does that happen?
It was 2004 when we got our first national offer. The Harry Brown show was being carried by Genesis Communications Network. Ian called them in order to be able to carry Harry Brown on the station that he and I were working for at the time. In the process of having that conversation, he asked, "You guys looking for any other content?" They said yes. In fact, they were looking to break out of this sort of conspiracy theory box that they were in and have a more well-rounded show. We were on 2 nights on the weekend, 2 weekends, I should say. 2 weekends, I think it was a Saturday. And we did 7p to 10p a Saturday, 2 Saturdays in a row. Our first stations, we had 3 of them. And they were broadcast out of Maryville, Tennessee, which I still couldn't put on a map. 6 watts, which is 3 times as powerful as a Marine band radio, and went out of Providence that flipped before we even went weeknights. We were on 2 consecutive weekends. GCN said, "You guys want to do a weeknight show?" We said, "Absolutely." And bang, we were on. That was syndication. We added that was November, I think, of 2004. We added in about 2 years, 25 stations. We moved up to New Hampshire in 2006. And we probably added a total of 300 radio stations in the course of our career.
So we're overlapping a lot during this period because I negotiated Harry Brown's deal for the radio stage for that radio show. In the course of my discussion with them, they asked me if I wanted a show, and I was on Sunday afternoons, starting in the spring of 2005, and I became Harry's guest host because Harry got very sick and ultimately passed away, and I became his guest host. And so, we encountered each other. And when your show was on, for a while, I had the distinction of being the only guest that you guys had on because it was Free Talk Live. What does a free talk mean? It was something you guys pioneered. What does that mean?
Free Talk Live was anybody could call in and talk about anything that was on their mind. It's still that way. Free Talk Live is on the weekends on a handful of stations. It's currently being managed by Ian's wife. So this is so. But the concept was radio as it was meant to be. You can call in, you can hijack the airwaves, you can talk about whatever's on your mind, and we are ready to go. We will talk about that subject. Most people, I don't think, ever believed us. But if you listened long enough, you had to come to the same conclusion that, in fact, people could call in and talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And you're right, we didn't generally have guests. We did have you on. You were enmeshed with the show.
Yeah, I was kind of grandfathered in, oddly enough, right?
Yeah, I think we would have just called you a guest co-host whenever you wanted to be on. You sent us an email and said, "Hey, I'm working on this. Can I get on and talk about this?"
Yep.
Absolutely. And then we would talk to you about that, whatever it was you wanted to talk about, and whatever else we wanted to talk about. Because this was the thing about having you on is that you could handle any conversation that we were going to throw at you, and it was fine.
It was a lot of fun. So, uh, one more thing about the show. The show actually got pretty successful. Talkers Magazine was ranking you guys. They rank all the top talk shows in the country. You got into the heavy 100. How far up did you get?
We got up to number 24 in the Heavy 100. That would be a list of what Talkers Magazine called the most important radio programs in America. I don't know that we were the 24th most profitable show in America. I don't know that we were the 24th most listened to show, but I do think that we were important in so much as a lot of those, in a lot of ways, Sean Hannity was very much like a younger Rush Limbaugh. I'm not trying to disparage Sean. I've met him many times, and he's a kind and gentle man. I mean, I enjoy talking to him, but he kind of takes the same route as Rush does, and he continues to broadcast. Rush has passed. It wasn't a bad path to take, but there is kind of two different ways to go. You can either do a liberal talk show, you can do a conservative talk show. We were doing something different. We were doing a libertarian talk show. And I can tell you on certain topics, that's a lightning rod for difficulty.
So you guys moved to New Hampshire. You mentioned that date, but you didn't just move to New Hampshire. There was a Free State Project going on there. You were evangelists for the Free State Project, and you took it really to heart. So you moved to a specific spot in New Hampshire, and the people that are around you, and Ian even more specifically, are very active. Tell us about your move to New Hampshire.
Absolutely. So New Hampshire is the home of the Free State Project. The idea is to get 20,000 liberty-loving individuals to move to one state and see what happens. I think that that's still sort of a mystery. And at the time, Ian was very much an outside the system activist. He believed that anything that looked like politics was a complete waste of time. It was a treadmill to take the energy out of activists and just destroy their will. Because I think very much it did that to him. And as he moved, through the course of his adventures, he changed his mind. But at this time frame, we're talking about 2006 to say 2009, he was beginning to collect around him a lot of people who wanted to do outside the system activism, whether this is, street theater or civil disobedience or any variety of things that just, we're living free, as they called it. And ultimately, he got quite a few people here that were doing just a bunch of different things. And Ian supported them all. He may not have agreed with every bit of activism that went on, but he would cover it and see what other people did. And I think that ultimately he tried to remain as subjective about it as possible.
All right, I'm going to operate off of like my impressions of what happened here because I've never actually discussed this with either you or him. Number one, was the studio for Free Talk Live that was in the first floor of his house, correct?
Yes.
And he bought the house next door as well.
It was a duplex.
Okay, so he had this 2-unit. I got the impression that not only did he take the activism seriously, but there was like an open welcome mat for people to come from anywhere across the country, park at the house, maybe stay at, in the house next door. Like y'all were like really putting out the welcome mat. That Ian was an incredibly generous guy.
Ian would invest in what he considered to be liberty activism as thoroughly as he could. And it had its difficulties, but you're absolutely right. So essentially, he opened up the other side of the duplex to what we call the Keene Activist Center. He allowed some people to stay there who sort of ran, call it a hostel of sorts for liberty pioneers, liberty pilgrims. And, people would come. Some of them would sit in on the studio. Largely reserved the studio itself for people who were amplifiers of Free Talk Live.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surely somebody came in that was not, but essentially it was the other side of the duplex that was that sort of thing. So Ian had his abode above the studio, And, the studio was in the living room. It wasn't some spare bedroom. It was a good sized room. It needed to be.
I would like you to talk to me before we get into what you guys did in Keene about your evolving spirituality during this period. Where did you start, both of you, on this? And then what happened during the time that you guys had this program to you guys kind of spiritually?
Sure. Ian would have called himself an atheist when we started the program. I would have used the term sort of spiritual to describe myself, but highly damaged by my time in sort of a mainstream Christian church, but the evangelical side of it all. And it just, pretty much combative when it came to talking about anything, any other person's point of view besides my own. I was like a green-haired liberal when it came to spirituality. Like, you simply agreed with me or you were going to be lambasted at every turn. And over time, my participation with Quakers and friends, I began to see that God can show himself differently to different people, and that the old saying about the blind men and the elephant. I really like that analogy. One of them's holding onto the tail, says he feels a rope. Another one is touching the sides, says he feels a wall. Another one touching a leg, says he feels a tree trunk. None of them are wrong.
Mhm.
They're just having a different experience about what they're touching. And for me, I just kind of managed to sort of grow out of it. One time a caller calls in to Free Talk Live, and we always looked at ourselves as a political show. We were the best news, politics podcast in the world. Before Joe Rogan existed, we were the number one podcast in the world, right? And we, proudly won podcastaward.com's award 5 times in the news politics section. And so we looked at ourselves as political. But as well as I do that libertarianism isn't just a political philosophy, it's a moral philosophy. And one day we had a caller call in, a guy who wrote for Mises. His name was Robert Wicks. And he said that we reminded him more of the preachers that he heard on the radio talking about a moral paradigm than we did the political talkers talking about which one of these liars and thieves to vote for on this go round. And so I kind of took that to heart. I spent I would spend time every day by myself thinking about what we talked about, in sort of a state of meditation. But I would often do physical labor while thinking about it. Just, time, not necessary time in my head, as opposed to, having to think about something. Splitting wood, easy to do. You don't have to think about it too much. So I would spend time every single day just kind of thinking about what we said. And I came to the conclusion Robert Wicks was correct. We were, in fact, a Christian, call it, radio program. We were a spiritual, religious radio program. And so over time, we organized as such a thing. We had people who followed us on a regular basis. Nothing different between us and the 700 Club. We were doing all that. There's not as much crying, begging for money, but we didn't really have to beg for money so much in 2012. In 2010, we were the first radio program in the world to talk about Bitcoin. In 2011, we were met by Gavin Andreessen, the then head developer of Bitcoin. And then we talked about Bitcoin that night on the air. Roger Ver, who became known as Bitcoin Jesus. I think more accurately, he should be called Crypto Johnny Appleseed. But you pick. Don't call him whatever you want. Everybody knows what we're talking about. And he went on a 3-day manic binge, just consuming information about this nascent project and how money of value on the internet could truly change the world. Within months, he demanded to pay his bill on Free Talk Live. He was an advertiser for memory dealers. They sold optical transceivers. And no, I don't know what those are. And he their computer thing. He paid his bill in, and by the way, he changed his advertising from memory dealers to Bitcoin. Just advertise Bitcoin, just talk about Bitcoin. And so within, say, call it the summer of 2011, we were probably the largest Bitcoin radio program. We were taking half of our revenue in cryptocurrency, and we sort of loaded up. And as cryptocurrency went up in value, advertising became less and less important on Free Talk Live, and it was just a project to promote the ideas of liberty and our, moral teaching platform, or church.
So Ian is in prison now for reasons we're going to break down and spend most of our time talking, but it wasn't his first time in jail. And it wasn't the first time for all the people who were traveling up to see you all in Keene. Wasn't there for, some of them were going to jail at times too. People were beginning to congregate there in Keene. Give the audience one or two examples of the types of actions that you all were taking up there.
Sure. So Ian really was into this civil disobedience thing. I called it his civil disobedience merit badge. And he decided one day he was just going to, the next thing that happens, I'm going to be there and I'm going to participate in a way that he had not heretofore participated. So some of the activists were in Central Square doing civil disobedience, which in this form took the form of drinking from an open container on town property with their tops off. So yes, there were women with their tops off in the middle of town square drinking like Mike's Hard Lemonade and things like that. So Ian, swoops in like the guardian angel and sits on the hood of the police car to try to prevent this woman from being arrested. And it turns out that, he probably waylaid the operation by a whole 10 minutes, but he and the topless lady went off to jail, and he had to sit in jail for a period of time. Another instance, he had a couch that was on his property, and he wasn't going to be told to take that couch off. And of course, the town's like, couch has got to go. And it wasn't put there by him. It was just something that was left there by the property owner before. And I will admit that I never noticed the couch either. I never really saw the thing sitting there. But, the town demanded that he take it off. He's like, I'm not taking it off. And he starts asking questions in the court while standing. The judge is like, sit down.
Okay,
you're in contempt.
This is, to me, one of the most interesting things you guys managed to do up there. This was a social experiment par excellence. So the judge walks into a courtroom, and I was going to come into a courtroom. The bailiff will say, all rise. What did your friends do?
No rising went on. Quakers have done this for many, many years. And, I consider it against my religion to respect one man over another, especially just because we're told to.
Right. And it wasn't well received initially, was it?
Oh, no. Anybody with a camera, anybody who was seated, any variety of things, they realized at some point they were just giving more attention to the kind of attention the activists wanted, but they just didn't have a system. And I do think that the activists in Keene, New Hampshire were part of a catalyst that resulted in people being able to have videos in courtrooms and, the court not taking itself quite so seriously.
Right. Eventually the judge would come in, the bailiff would announce, so a lot of people would still be sitting there and nothing would happen, right?
Whatever. Yeah. Like the nurse walking into the waiting room, some people might rise, but some people might not. So that doesn't mean we don't respect the nurse.
I was partially inspired by you guys. I almost started a project called Deny Consent, because what I saw there was that entire edifice operated on the fact that everybody thought it had to. And there was hysterical reaction the first few times that somebody didn't participate. I mean, there are threats of contempt of court, actual contempt of court, bailiffs, threatening violence. I mean, the whole 9 yards happened, but after it was done for a while, became like, why are we doing all of this? And just pretty soon they continued the custom, but it was empty and it didn't matter. There's nothing going on. And it's like, if we don't participate, if we don't like back up their play, they have to stop the play.
It agreed. And if enough people, the fact is nobody goes to court. And so when you have 20 activists that show up to court, we're the entire courtroom. Maybe there's a handful of other people hanging on, but at that point you've got the analogy of the one guy dancing, and then you get another guy who goes to dance with them, and then there's a third guy, and then pretty soon you're weird if you're just sitting on the baseball field and you're not dancing. Well, when you've got 20 activists who refuse to stand, you've got these people with speeding tickets and whatever they've got, smoking, tickets for smoking weed or whatever. They're looking around and saying, oh my gosh, these people aren't standing. They don't have respect for the power crazed lunatic in the black muumuu. Why in the world aren't they standing? And so they, at some point, they don't stand. Like the respect is eroded quickly. It doesn't erode. It just crumbles.
Right.
And this is, and they see it too.
The fact that they respond, like,
it's worse.
It's a better strategy for them.
Yep.
Right. It's like, oh, well, we didn't really care if they stood up anyway. It's like you did, but it's not going to do you any good. I loved all this. So Ian gets involved in a Bitcoin business. He starts setting up kiosks. He's distributing Bitcoin. I believe that he's doing it through your church as well.
Let me back up just a little bit.
Yes, please do.
So we organize the church, and then we organize an organization called Bitcoin Not Bombs. So Bitcoin Not Bombs is predicated on the notion that in World War II, here in the United States, where I happen to be right now, not all of our listeners necessarily are, in the United States, when the government wanted to raise money for its war effort, it went out and it said, we are the good guys, they are the bad guys, we must defeat them, give us money so that we may defeat them. And people did. People voluntarily had victory gardens. They participated in rationing programs. Some people weren't so good at participation in the rationing programs, but others were. And many people voluntarily bought war bonds. In 2002, I think it was, George Bush Jr., the junior one, was asked, how can Americans help the government in its war on terror? And he was stumbled for just a second, like, why would you help the government and its fighting and these sorts of things? But he understood very innately that people did want to help, and that, you got to remember, people were putting American flags on their windshields. They were saying, we stand united, and all this stuff. This was post 9/11, briefly thereafter, and people did want to help. And I think that many Americans would have invaded Canada had the government said that they were the ones who perpetrated 9/11. And it didn't matter the truth of it. That what mattered was action. We need some action. So George Bush puts on the war of terror, which is nice and broad. We're going to go after the bad people, not the good people. And we're certainly, this isn't going to be self-serving. This is a war of justice and truth, whatever the case may be. Right. He says, as a solution to the question, how do we help as Americans? He says, go shopping. Now, that's just what we call in economics the velocity of money. He's not wrong. It's helpful. He's not kidding. It's helpful. That these bonds that they have, these really are an anachronism. They really don't help the government that much. And that something changed between 1942 and 2002. And what that was the Bretton Woods Accords. I don't need to tell you guys. If people want to look it up, they can look it up on their own. But essentially, money wasn't backed by gold and silver any longer. It was simply backed by the full faith and credit of the United States war machine. And that's what happened. Now, we were a founding member of an organization called Bitcoin Not Bombs. And what we believe, fundamentally, and I still do believe this, is that a currency of value means that the government is more subservient to the people than the people are to the government. When the liars, thieves, killers, and bureaucrats that populate governments around the world have to come to you and say, can you give us some of your money of value so that we might perpetrate our evil deeds? Then they're much more subservient. Now, when they have a printing press, they just full speed ahead, baby. We got countries to bomb. And that's why you see inflation. That's why you saw during the Biden administration, it's hard to really know how much, in fact, money was printed, but some say that 40% of the dollars that were created since the United States was taken off the gold standard were created within the Biden administration. Could be true, or maybe it was the Trump administration prior to it. I don't, to me, it's just faces changing in large part. So we were part of this Bitcoin Not Bombs, and that's what Ian was really trying to promote. Ian believed thoroughly that we need to use a currency of value, and the only way to get people to use it is if they have it. So he wanted to sell it to people, put it in their hands so they knew it was worth something. And he went about using a website called LocalBitcoins to sell stuff. And he had 5,000 positive ratings on LocalBitcoins, far more transactions than that. And he had a great system for identifying who was buying, talking to them, asking them questions, things like, are you the victim of a scam? Why do you want Bitcoin? Are you investing in Bitcoin? Like whatever the questions might be, he would ask these questions, and he managed to ferret out quite a few people who were victims of a scam, and tried to help them, and did. There's police organizations out there that will say that Ian Freeman worked with them to stop this or that thing, this or that crime. And I think that Ian fundamentally believed that he was doing the right thing the whole time.
We're going to get into the specifics of the story in just a moment, but just on a personal note, you said some very nice things about me at the beginning. I've known you guys for a long time, and Ian, you said something about peacefulness or whatever. Ian was very, very peaceful. He's kind of almost, to me, like almost a Thoreau character in a way, in that he enjoyed his time by himself, but when he started to talk, he had a lot of passion about the things he cared about, and he cared deeply about other people. And to go out and begin doing this, like when I read up and do research on what happened to him here and the things that he's accused of, I know full well that if he was in the middle of something, even if there was an attempt to profit, there's no way he would have accepted money in return for seeing somebody harmed. I mean, it wasn't just, you mentioned, Mark, that this isn't just it's a moral philosophy that you're talking about. It's not just politics. And it was something that, in my observation of his character, which I think was decently substantial, I didn't see anything ever, not even the slightest crack of opportunism, greed, any interest in money really per se. He seemed to live a fairly simple Spartan life. You talked about living up above the studio. He was never dressed ostentatiously. The stuff that he was doing all seemed kind of cause devoted, and he never seemed like I never heard him talk about money. I don't know. I don't recall any time where he's like, oh, I got to get money for this. We got to get money for that. I'd really like to have this car. I just never, that kind of stuff doesn't seem to come up. Am I wrong about any of that?
No, and I would add to what you're saying. I agree 100%. Even before, so Ian Freeman was wealthy. Ian Freeman is wealthy. He was one of the early adopters of Bitcoin. He and I got our first Bitcoin at 27 cents. It currently just peaked over $110,000 per Bitcoin. That's a lot of upside from 2010 till now. And Ian Freeman, I don't know how to describe him, but wealthy. The accusation that he ripped off little old ladies for a few $1 million is laughable when you realize how much money Ian donated to the Shire Free Church, the organization that owns Free Talk Live, because Ian Freeman didn't need money. He didn't want money, and money wasn't meaningful to him. Every bit of profit that he got out of Bitcoin, he dumped back into the community of Keene in order to see Bitcoin adoption there. And it was working.
This show is brought to you by the Zero Aggression Project. Zap newsletter subscribers get alerts when each episode is released. The Zap website is also the pathway by which you can contact us by email and support the show. This program operates thanks to tax-deductible Zap contributions, and we appreciate your support. So, zap the state, and have a nice day.
You could go in Keene, New Hampshire, you could buy a soda, you could get a cup of coffee, you could buy a hamburger, you could get your hair cut, you could go get your car fixed, you could go to the local nursery and buy plants. You could you could pay your rent in many locations. You could do just about anything shy of legitimate grocery shopping in Bitcoin at the time. And this is when transactions were quite low. And this was by and large part because of Ian's activism, or because he inspired people through his activism. Lots of other people were doing things too. He gave bounties to people to bring on businesses who would take Bitcoin. And this is completely an ideological idea. And I believe that Ian's lawyer failed when he failed to show that Ian is an ideologue, because he didn't feel like the jury could understand what that could mean. But I think if the jury had known how wealthy that Ian was, or at least had some notion of how wealthy he was, because this is a guy who could have packed it all in and gone and the sunny spot, wherever that might be, drink margaritas and pay girls in bikinis to wait on him. Absolutely could have done that. His choice instead was to work as hard as he could all day, every day, in order to promote peace, freedom, and personal responsibility, because that's what he believed in, because he was a ideologue at the highest level. I like to describe him as Sheldon, only not funny. And it's just,
you can get away with that. So in 2019, when he meets Pavel Prilotsky, is that because he has done so much to change the face of Keene that he's kind of a threat to the system, or is something else going on here? Who was Pavel Prilotsky?
So this was I hesitate to say, but this man was basically coming inserting himself into the activism. He would drive from upstate New York and buy Bitcoin and talk to the activists, participate in some of the events, and generally inserted himself. Then one day, when it was in the evening after the show, I, of course, went home, family man, and have no interest in going out to Central Square and drinking, beers out there in the cold. And Pavel says to somebody within earshot of Ian that he is, a heroin dealer, and that he's using Bitcoin to launder money. And, who knows whether this is, why this person would be saying this, but once you know that somebody's doing a thing, you're an accessory, or you're involved, or whatever the situation is. You're inserted into the conspiracy. After that point, Ian never sold him another Bitcoin. And the judge in the case admits this. Now, it turns out Pavel was working for the IRS, and that he was an undercover agent. But it didn't really matter.
I just want to make sure I understand what that means. Is he directly employed by the Internal Revenue Service as a full-time government employee, or is he like a freelance agent, so to speak, maybe a witness that's trying to get himself a better deal? What's his status and rank in this?
He is an employee of the Internal Revenue Service.
So he does this to other people. Since then, he's probably gone on to do other things with other people.
Quite possibly. Sometimes they'll take agents out of circulation once they get enough publicity. It's quite possible.
Is this even his real name?
Yes. Okay.
So he shows up. He's spending time in New Hampshire.
In the United States, supposedly we have the right to face our accusers. That is his real name.
How long does he spend basically embedding himself and making friends in this community?
probably 4 months.
We,
I never met the man.
we were, I had a speaking event. I've talked about this a few different times. I think I've even brought it up here on the show. I had a speaking event that I did in 2011, I believe it was. Might have been 10. And we had a guy show up, and he came up to me. I was one of the speakers at this event. And when he came up to me and he's like, we got to do something. We really, really got to do something. I'm like, yeah, you're right. We got to do something. I'm glad you're all fired up. No, we got to do something. I'm like, yeah, of course we got to do something. It's like, no, he's like, we got to do something serious. Like, we can't be mouth artists here. We have to be willing to go go the extra distance here. I'm like, what do you mean we got to go the extra distance? Like, well, I don't think talking's enough. There's a lot of talking here. We probably have to go out and take some action. We have to take some action. I'm like, action? Like, what kind of action? He's like, well, I don't know. I don't have any specific ideas, but, I want to know if everybody here is just a mouth artist. I said, hold on a minute. So I went over to the organizers of the event and I said, we got a Fed here. Totally. We got a Fed. And told them what had just transpired. And we had to immediately kind of go around and start talking to everybody and say, this dude is probably a Fed. Be careful around him. Be careful what you say. And the organizers ran interference. Anytime he would start to talk to another participant, they would go over and start having a conversation with them. Because if you do anything that's making any kind of impact, they show up. They're there. They're embedded. This is what they do. Now, it turns out the guy's wearing khakis and a blue shirt with a button-down collar, which is kind of a uniform of sorts. I think they're better now at disguising themselves, but not 100%. And he left. He didn't stay for the whole event. When you looked out over the audience, if you were up there on the stage speaking, he was the only guy that wasn't happy. Everybody else was enjoying the show. He wasn't happy. Everybody else was a happy warrior. He wasn't happy. And he left. He didn't stick around. He was frustrated enough to leave. I tell this story because I suspect you guys had people, because of the stuff you were doing in Keene, I kind of had this suspicion that, there's probably a couple of people that have come walking through your midst that have kind of been like, hey, we need to do something illegal.
Yeah, it happened over and over again. I can't say I had a lot of contact with them. I think that if anybody listened to the show, that my role as the voice of reason made me less interesting than Ian, the more radical of the two. But in many cases, they would approach Ian, they'd go to events, they'd try to buy guns, they would, obviously libertarians think guns are good. And so, who else would you go to for a, machine gun or a shot-off shotgun or whatever the case may be? And pretty quickly, if you came in and you didn't do your due diligence, and they learned this, if you didn't do your due diligence and put your time in, you weren't going to be considered somebody that they would do business with. And I'm not saying they're selling automatic weapons and sawing off shotguns. Frankly, the feds don't understand. And even the violent normal people, because they exist, the normies, the muggles like that are out there that want to be violent against the government, it doesn't work. But they're passionate, they're moved. And so the feds look at the world from a top-down hierarchical system. They work in an organization that claims the monopoly privilege and the use of violence. And they see violence as the solution. And that's what they're worried about. That's what they're thinking about. They know if they want to stop something, they will use violence to stop that thing from happening. That's how they think. So libertarianism is a grassroots moral movement where we look at the situation. How are we going to change this thing or that thing? And it's not easy. It is very, very difficult to stop the war machine from doing the war machine stuff without being, in some way, active. But it's also not easy or likely that you're going to stop it in any other way either. Timothy McVeigh didn't stop the government from doing the things that he didn't like about it.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, he was unsuccessful. And, I would look at people like Grover Norquist. Now, he's what I call one of the most effective libertarian activists out there. The guy who created Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that might be. Many of these people were highly effective in creating a world where we, subterfuge, fraud, force, and these sorts of things are used less often to solve problems. That's activism.
So Ian catches wind that Pavel is claiming that he's using Bitcoins for his drug distribution. And he says, hey, I got more Bitcoin to sell you, right?
No, Ian said, Pavel approached him, said, hey, I want to buy some Bitcoin. Ian said, sorry, you got a little loose-lipped. I don't know if it was the alcohol or what it was going on, but I know now that you apparently have a drug distribution business. Look, I don't want to, it's not that I think that it's immoral. I think that as long as your customers are voluntary, that's fine, but I cannot participate with you. That would be a felony. And Pavel says, well, I'm just going to go to one of your vending machines and I'm going to buy Bitcoin that way. And Ian says, well, you don't have my permission, but I can't stop you. And this was what the money laundering charge that was brought up against Ian was predicated on. And although the jury found him guilty of it, the judge clawed that back. And I need the listeners to understand just how rare it is that a judge will go and say, this sworn and honorable jury is mistaken here, and I'm going to claw this back. It just never happens.
And it happened because, well, there's a multitude of factors going on here. I want to make sure everybody kind of understands a few of them, if probably not all of them. But first, Ian uses the term knowingly. And the way you just described this, he basically said, I don't knowingly want to be involved in your drug distribution. And you just kind of laid it out here. He's philosophically speaking, he's saying, look, I don't care what you do. I'm a libertarian here. As long as you're not harming anybody, that's not my business. But I'm not going to do business with you going forward because that's the way the laws of this country work, which is good enough to be called legal.
Yep.
But somehow or other, this got turned into a thought crime in front of the jury.
I think that
as if Ian was endorsing the crime.
No, I think that fundamentally what the jury, the conclusion that the jury came to was that Ian was unlikable and that it's sad when little old ladies lose their money. What the jury decided was it was better to convict the gun store owner that had sold a gun unknowingly to a bad person, and that bad person had done bad things with it, because we can never get the bad person. To my knowledge, in fact, the FBI's fraud detection agent, or whatever her name was, said she had never in her career had a scammer, that Ian Freeman was the first scammer. And, Ian never scammed anybody. No. Everybody got their transaction the way that he proffered it. But it was sad that little old ladies lost their money. It was sad that they believed that these Nigerian princes were, who were posing as, white longshoremen or roughnecks or whatever the story is that they were told, or IRS agents, or, whatever the story was. It's sad that they sent them money, but they sent them all kinds of money, whether it was gift cards. They didn't go after Walmart. They didn't go after Target.
No, in fact, this brings up exactly what I think is the most important question in this entire episode. I want to know if dollar bills have ever been used in a drug transaction.
I'm pretty sure that 99% of transactions in drugs were done in fiat currency.
And there's even reports over the years that there's actually drug substance on a lot of the currency that's floating around.
Yep.
Okay. And why then isn't the Treasury Secretary in prison responsible for that? Why isn't the head of the Federal Reserve in prison? Why aren't there bank presidents in prison for the fact that someone somewhere used an ATM and took currency out and then went and that's how preposterous this whole thing is. You've just told somebody, I don't want to deal with you. You've just told them, listen, I'm not trying to interfere with you. I'm not making any moral thing. I just don't, this is what the law is. I'm not going to participate in your thing. Well, I could go to your kiosk. Don't. He's saying don't. How then is he responsible? Just like the gun shop owner, how is he responsible for this? I want to know why we don't have the Treasury Secretary in prison, because we know they're criminals anyway. Why aren't they in prison for the crimes that they're not monitoring 24/7 all over the globe?
I'll go you one further. I agree with everything you said. Go you one further. They mentioned Coinbase in the trial and Kraken. These are two organizations that you can buy Bitcoin from legally that have their money transmitter licenses. Are you saying that no scammer has ever gotten somebody, one of their scam victims, to go through the process, which was no less rigorous than Ian's process, to buy Bitcoin from them? And what difference would it have made? So I say they've probably sold more Bitcoin to scam victims than Ian ever could have, but they didn't go after them either because they've got the government stamp of approval. Now, Ian did this whole know your customer, KYC. He did all this stuff. He'd ask the person for a picture of them with their driver's license. He'd talk to them. I was there in the studio, out front of the studio, on at the very least 2 separate occasions, as I recall them, where he was asking questions. Do you know your boyfriend that you're trying to send money to? Have you met them in real life? Do you know what a romance scam is?
Mm-hmm.
And he was trying to let this person know that, you're probably getting ripped off. But they'd already sent money. What was he going to do? How are you going to refund money that was deposited in a bank account? You can't. The only way he can transmit value to that person is through Bitcoin. And so he did. But he tried to tell them. And, here's the challenge I'd like to give to your listeners. Find somebody in your life who's currently being scammed and try to convince them that they are. Because if you've ever dealt with somebody like this, you realize that somebody who's in this situation, they're just so neck deep in the lies and the fantasy world that's been given to them that they simply cannot. They're good people and they have good social skills, but those social skills work within a high trust environment. And once that high trust environment is penetrated, those skills don't work anymore.
All right. I want to give the audience, we're not going to give every single detail of the case. We're going to tell you where you can get more information when we're all done. But I want to, as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there are 8 counts here that are basically fall into 4 categories. There's money laundering, which got kicked out. There's conspiracy to money launder. There's operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. And there is an attempt to evade and defeat taxes for 3 tax years in the late 2010s.
Yeah.
Is that basically an accurate summary of events?
Yeah, there's a conspiracy to commit unlicensed money transmission. There's a total of 7 charges that he's currently in prison for at this time. That's the unlicensed money transmission, conspiracy to commit unlicensed money transmission, conspiracy to commit money laundering. And this conspiracy basically is that Ian and the people he was working with knew that scammers would buy Bitcoin or have people buy Bitcoin. And therefore, this was an unspoken conspiracy between he and they.
Which is a weird thing. Conspiracy requires communication.
It does.
And you have to be seeking to harm somebody.
Yeah, and also the money transmission, there's Ian, you would have to do it knowingly. Ian had a legal opinion that said that he was not a money transmitter. So in his mind, he was not. He had gone and paid an attorney to, go out on a limb, and this was never brought up in court. I think it's absolutely insane that it was never brought up in court. But here's probably the single most important point of it all, is that there's 4 tax evasion charges. Tax evasion isn't some minor thing that you can accidentally do, ladies and gentlemen. You must knowingly, intentionally take steps in order to evade taxes that you're supposed to pay, and this, that, and the other. And one of the fundamental reasons for parts, the bits, the important factors is that you must have a tax burden. This makes sense, right? How can you evade taxes if you don't know that you have to pay them? Like, this is the highest level of intentionality. You must have a tax burden, and that tax burden must be stated. The Internal Revenue Service of the United States of America has never given Ian Freeman a piece of paper that says, this is how much you owe, Mama Jamma, give us the money. Never, not before the trial, not during the trial, and not since the trial. There's never been a sheet of paper. In fact, and I think that this is the whole court should have just been ended when this moment occurred. On the stand, the IRS agent agreed to the statement that Ian Freeman's lawyer made, which was, so it's quite possible then, ma'am, that Ian doesn't have a tax burden, and he may owe nothing at all. And she said yes. And that's where the trial should have, at the very least, those charges should have been dropped immediately.
Yep.
There's no tax burden. And a man sitting in jail on 4 counts of tax evasion because the jury's like, I think it's sad that the little old ladies lost money. That's not what the charges are here. They would have convicted him of Jimmy Hoffa's murder if that would have been one of the options, if they thought that would somehow make these little old ladies whole. And I think that, well, anyway, I want to talk about what happened at the sentencing.
Let's talk, before we get to that, let's do one more thing. Let's bring 2 more things. Let's bring the little old ladies into the equation here. Jacob Hornberger has called it a lonely heart scam, right? But
that's what it is, yeah.
None of these people had filed civil suit. None of them could have filed civil suit, as I understand it, against Ian. There was no way that they could have identified him as their victimizer. But they managed to testify in court. I'm curious about how, I don't know, it seems weird to me that our judicial system would permit people to just come in and issue random complaints. You know, I'm upset. I was murdered the other night and somebody was driving a Chevrolet, and the CEO of Chevrolet auto account for the fact that, you know, somebody was driving that kind of car, or they were using the street or whatever. Like there was no, he didn't have a practical connection to what was happening here.
Correct. He did speak to the little old ladies, and he had a transaction with them in the same way that you probably have transactions with people all day long. I think that what they were trying to do, the claim of the judge when he allowed this testimony in, and remember, the judge used to work for the same office that was then prosecuting Ian. These people who were sitting there had previously been his under.
And the prosecutor in his case has since gone on to become a federal judge.
Correct. The gift was given by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
The judge said that essentially we were trying to show the scam, how the scam worked in order to prove the money laundering conspiracy idea. So that how Ian Freeman thought that things would happen. And that was the reason for letting these people in. The appeal's been sitting on the desks of the First Circuit in Boston since February, and I've been waiting for a ruling. Well, I thought it was going to be 2 weeks. Shows what I know. Some kind of ruling, and I don't know what they're trying to come up with, but I do have one sort of irrelevant story that I'd love to tell about this, which is in 2005, Ian and I were at a convention in Washington, D.C., where they were promoting this new radio product called Air America. During the rubber chicken lunch that we are served, there was a new talent that I had never seen before on stage interviewing the senior senator from Delaware. Now, I'm like, oh, a senator, big deal, right? And so 45 minutes of this arduous lunch, Rachel Maddow asking canned questions to Joe Biden. Joe Biden stands before turns to the audience, raises his hands above his head, and to a room full of Republican talk show hosts, he waits for applause. He is roundly booed. Then his soulless butt runs to the door of the room and begins shaking hands to people on the way out. Ian and I are sitting at the closest table to that door. I go before Ian. My hand is shaken vigorously by Joe Biden, and off I go. Ian has seen all of this. At this point, he is a young man in his 20s, hates political activism, hates politicians. He sees an opportunity, sticks his hand way out so that Joe can get it. Joe's like, oh yeah, somebody loves me. He goes in for a double two-handed handshake with young Ian, and Ian pulls it back and then brushes it through his hair with the old 1980s psych, or the hairy hand. And the people behind him guffaw and jeer, and Biden looks like a fool. Now, I don't know whether it's Joe or one of his handlers or whatever, but I do truly believe that this is some small part of why Ian Freeman is sitting in prison right now, is because during the Biden administration, he's like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah, I remember him. So you wanted to get in something about the sentencing itself. There's a story there
Right.
you want to share with us.
So Ian Freeman, at the sentencing, he's been sent home for the trial. He's not in jail. He's allowed to be with his wife and just be at home. And he's been had a little ankle bracelet on and participated with probation for quite some time because he was out on bond, and it was all part of this. They called him a danger to the community while he was out on bond. That somehow he was going to sell Bitcoin to somebody or something. I don't know. And they wanted to make him into this big villain, and he was never a villain. And he goes to the sentencing. We sit there, the little old lady saying, Ian Freeman's bad. I want my money. Ian Freeman, do anything you can do to give me some of the money of my heirs that I have given away frivolously to Nigerian princes. I'll say anything. And, I mean, who knows what kind of stories the state has filled their heads with. But Ian sits there and listens to this. The judge warns him as he stands up. Now, son, I want to warn you that if you take this opportunity to grandstand and lambast the court in this serious situation, it's not going to go well for you. And the judge really just wasn't ready for what Ian had cooked up. Ian gets up there. He reads a prepared statement where he says, he's terribly sorry for the harm that's been caused and any role that he may have played in it, but he's in a very difficult position. He believes that he is fundamentally, or I believe, depending on how you want this story given, he believes that he is fundamentally not guilty of all these charges. However, he knows that there's going to be a monetary component of his sentencing, and he would much rather his money that's confiscated from him go to these little old ladies to in some way make them whole from these scams that they participated in, rather than buying $1 million bombs to drop on $10 tents. And then goes on to discuss this. The judge was not ready for this. The judge wasn't ready for a contrite and reasonable activist to get up and say that, look, you work for an organization that kills people around the world for money. And he just wasn't ready for that. So he did make the deal. Yep, you can give your money to these old people. We'll make sure the government gets nothing. They spent millions of dollars on this case. The government gets nothing in return. And that the one thing is that when you give that money away, it is never coming back. If you win your case in appeal, well, you can get your money back if it goes to the government. But if it goes to these little old ladies, it'll never come back. Ian says, fine. And he signs that piece of paper and that money goes. And he had millions of dollars that they confiscated from him. And
it was $5 million, right?
It really depends on the day that you look at it. Basically, it was a 100 Bitcoin novelty item it was like a gold-plated bar that had 100 Bitcoins embedded in it. The terminology doesn't work very well. Basically, they managed to confiscate 100 Bitcoin token. And so it depends on where in time you decide this Bitcoin is worth what. If it's worth 50,000, yeah, it was $5 million. If it was worth 30,000, then yeah. If it was worth 17,000, whatever.
So Ian is sentenced when and how long is he supposed to be in prison? It's late 2023, right?
That sounds right. Sentencing's October 2023. I do have notes here, believe it or not. I'm a professional.
Yes, and it's 9 years, close to 9 years.
He was given 96 months, 8 years in prison. His everything that they took out of his safe in his home was given up, and the money laundering charge was overturned at that time. So they took him into custody and they sent him to a local jail where he sat for quite some time. And then ultimately he has ended up in Devens work camp or something. It was the same place that his co-defendant, Ayer was, but they were not there at the same time. I think that was the whole thing, is they didn't want them both at the same prison at the same time. Now, it's worth pointing out that the appeal occurred in Boston on the 5th of February, 2025. That's this year. For those listening in the future, there was a 3-judge panel, and this is, I believe, God smiling upon us. None of those judges are former prosecutors, not a single one of them. An appellate bond was pled for, so we were asking for the opportunity to put up some money so that Ian could get out on bond and wait for, a real trial of real judges looking at this. And appellate bonds, the expectation was that could take 2 to 8 weeks. I don't, for those of you who know that it's July right now, I don't know how many weeks that is, but we're getting close to 30. And the one thing I don't understand is how the judges can look at the evidence on those 4 tax evasion charges. Now, understand there was also a money laundering charge dropped. That's 5 of the 8 charges that are highly suspect and not given appellate bond.
And no fraud charges whatsoever. None whatsoever.
The term fraud is
they use fraud in the press releases, but no charge whatsoever.
Right.
One last question.
They did that because libertarians are against fraud. And they knew that he would be ostracized to some extent by the libertarian community if they used that term.
We've just seen Russ Ulbricht and the Bitcoin community really surrounded him. He gets not just a commutation, but a full unconditional pardon. What is happening right now to get Ian a commutation or pardon?
So, again, Ian has a appeal in, and we have a team hired, and they are working on this. I just had a meeting today with people who shall not be named because they don't want to necessarily have their political enemies. We don't want to create sides in this, because this is a man who is unjustly in prison. No matter what you think about his politics, he's in prison unjustly. So we are working through the channels to try to reach some people. There have been meetings inside of the DOJ, specifically on Ian. They've asked for more information, and we're working with Trump's pardon czar in the hopes that we can see this occur. So
I want to do 2 bits of business. Is Ian still in Ayer, Massachusetts? Is that the prison that he's in?
Is Devens in Ayer? Because I thought it was in Devens. You could be right.
Yeah, it is. No, it's
little bitty towns, as you know.
The address I have here is Federal Medical Center, Devens.
Devens. Yeah. Okay. Then fine.
Okay. So we're going to give out how you can write to Ian, because you can send.
I don't know how that works.
I've got an address here that says that you can mail to him.
It may get rejected, but go right ahead, please.
Okay.
I could be wrong. It could only be emails that we're talking about here. I have never written a.
Well, off air, would you like to give that to us, and then we'll include it in the show notes?
No, you have to be directly on the list. There's no way. There isn't an email address. You have to go through their government system.
Let's see what happens with this. We'll give out this information anyway and see if it's of any value. People can attempt to do it. But the more important thing I want to point out right now is that people can go to freeiannow.org. That's freeiannow.org. We're going to include that in the show notes. We kind of brush through things. This is a podcast. We told you a lot about Ian. More about the case is actually located at that site. So you're probably sitting here saying, Jim, ask him about this, or I'm wondering about the other thing. That's a lot of that information is provided at Free Ian Now, and there's a petition there to sign, and you will get to meet Ian on video.
Yep.
So that you can see who he is and what he stands for.
Yeah, I think it's some of the most exciting video of all this is when the government gets your tax-paid bear cats and runs. They got two of them, and they run them into the side of this old New England house to create holes for their SWAT team to show up in the morning in order to get these people. And these dastardly criminals drag them through shattered glass and release their dog to run amok in the neighborhood. It was quite a time, but that video is pretty compelling, and we have it very nice. Ian, one thing Ian wants to make sure you know is the website freerogernow.org also. So these they're the same format, right? freeiannow.org, freerogernow.org, because Ian cares deeply about the other people, the other prisoners of war in the war on crypto. Trump said he ended the war on crypto, and now I believe it's his obligation to release the prisoners of war. And
he did the right thing with Ross. I mean, there's a lot of people upset with Donald Trump for a lot of very sound reasons, but there have been some good things that have happened as well. Yes. We've said on air here, call balls and strikes, and this is one of the good things, and it sets a precedent. Like, this is what should happen next. So, Mark, I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. It's always a pleasure to run into you. And I thank you very much for being with Gracearchy today. I am looking personally at how I can do more to help. I can't yet speak as to what we may do here with the resources that we have available. But I want to encourage everyone that is watching this to make sure that their friends know about what we're doing here and that they send people out to freeiannow.org. And they can check out and follow Mark Edge at Mark Edge Show on everybody's favorite social media. Yep, everybody's favorite social media, right? And thank you very much, Grace.
Thank you. One last thing that I would like to mention about this is if you want to do more, and I understand people do, besides signing the petition at freeiannow.org, Ian doesn't need your monetary contribution, but what we would love is for you to share on your social media freeiannow.org.